Hello, and welcome to the Early Career Researcher podcast, your regular discussion on all things relating to life and work of early career researchers working in the humanities. I'm Charlie, and today I'm joined by Rachel and Olivia as we delve further into the discussion about applying to do PhDs. Last time we talked about the decision-making process, reasons for wanting to do a PhD, and we offered up our experiences on what we felt it had been like to do a PhD. If you haven't heard it, go back and listen to our different perspectives on those topics. In this episode, we're going to be talking you through the application process. So picture the scene. You've listened to our first podcast and taken advice or opinions from lots of different people, and now you're ready to make the decision that you want to apply for that PhD place. But how does the process actually work? How does someone apply for a PhD? Are there some common mistakes or misconceptions that people make while applying? And do any of us presenters have any special advice that we'd give? At the time of recording, we're into the end of October and early November. This is exactly the time of year that UK and European institutions are taking the first stages of PhD applications. Deadlines are usually in late December or January, and funding deadlines a little later. So decisions will then be made in the summer to start degrees in the autumn or the fall. We're going to tell you a little bit more about that process today. We're going to talk about how you might choose a supervisor or a host institution. And if any of these ideas are new to you, then don't worry, because hopefully by listening to the next 45 minutes or so of our discussion, you'll be ready and happy and excited to apply for your PhD places and confident that you might get on one and pursue your dreams. So the first part of our conversation is going to be taken by Olivia, and we're going to be discussing what you need. So Olivia, over to you.
Yeah, so I thought I'd make a little list of the kind of basics of what needs to go into a doctoral application or a PhD application. And there's four things, I suppose. Two of them kind of go hand in hand, so maybe three things, but it's mainly a kind of there's four major things you need to make sure that you're thinking about when you're deciding whether or not you're going to go into a PhD, or if you've decided you're going to go into it, then these are the things you need to make sure you've ticked off your list. So more often than not, in some subjects this isn't the case, but more often than not, you're going to need a master's degree in a relevant subject. And we'll come back in a moment to talk maybe a little bit about what a relevant subject means. You need to make sure you have a host institution. So, and a host institution kind of goes hand in hand with a host supervisor. And later on, we're going to talk a little bit more about the relationship between an institution and a supervisor and you, and how you choose kind of one versus the other. But the other thing then you need is a supervisor, somebody who's going to lead you on your project and who's going to guide you. And usually that has to do with subject expertise. In fact, I think that almost always has to do with subject expertise. I can't think of many other reasons you'd choose a specific supervisor, but again, we'll get onto that. And then, of course, you need to find a way to pay for it.
Yeah.
So those are the ever looming question of how to pay for it. So those are kind of the three or four main big things that you need. And I think in terms of what constitutes a relevant subject, it's just worth kind of touching on this a little bit. Like Charlie and Rachel, do either of you have any sense of how you decide on a relevant subject?
I think that there's scope when you're applying for a PhD place to come in from a different discipline potentially. If you've worked in maybe say the same chronological area or same maybe if you have similar methodologies but you come from a slightly different discipline, maybe particularly in the humanities, you might have a master's in English but actually then move into history, or you might do an interdisciplinary PhD project. So I think that you don't necessarily have to stick with the same discipline as long as you can make a strong case for how your master's supported the kind of scholarship that you're hoping to do in your PhD.
Yeah,
I think actually like Olivia's perspective is perhaps quite useful here, because you trained as a medievalist, didn't you? But now you are kind of doing medieval, but not, right? So what's your situation?
I'm doing medievalism. Yeah, I trained
Yeah.
as a medievalist, but I mean I'm now, gosh, I'm at an institution that specializes in English studies and whatever that means. But I trained as a historian. I do a bit of art history. I do a bit of sociology in there, a bit of literary analysis. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of different disciplines that have come into it from that aren't necessarily relevant to my master's. But I think what I would say is that a relevant subject is kind of whatever you can argue that it is in your application.
Yeah, and I think that's important, isn't it? Like in your application, they're going to be looking for things like, having studied this, I am now ready and prepared to do this. Or like, having studied this, I'm motivated to want to explore these things further. So if you can make links between those topics, then, absolutely go
Yeah,
for it.
your gold. Yeah.
Your
And
goals.
I suppose it's worth mentioning that strictly what constitutes a relevant subject, like often they will put on if there's like a doctoral position in a certain department being advertised, they might list what possibly relevant disciplines include. But again, like look at it, but like take it with a grain of salt. If you can make an argument for your previous experience and how it's led to what you want to do, then that's great.
So about choosing a place and a university that fits the project. This is an interesting one, isn't it? We've got on our notes that we have meticulously prepared before every podcast. It's important to find out what an institution's research priorities are. How do we find out what an institution's research priorities are? How do you find out whether a university will actually host you? Who has thoughts on that? How might we go about doing that? I mean, is it simply a case of Googling the university and looking at their department website? Is it that simple?
That'll do it.
Yeah,
That's one way.
that's definitely a place to start, isn't it? Because you can often look at current PhD students who are funded by the institution and look at the types of projects, not necessarily in what areas they're doing, but maybe the different methodologies that they're trying to encourage, or whether they're funding a lot of interdisciplinary PhDs. And you can also, it sounds really boring, but look at the strategic plans of departments as well as institutions, because you have to remember that often it's not at a department level that the funding, that decision on whether your PhD application is being put forward to the funding body, often that takes place at a university-wide level. There's many tiers to it. So if you can appeal to the university's kind of strategic path, then that's not a bad thing.
And also from department level, you might find that your department has a particular research center or a research cluster of academics that will work on a particular theme. And if you fit that, then you're much more likely to be able to win the kind of department backing and eventually faculty backing in supporting your application. So that's another good way. Basically, look at their website. I do this when I apply for jobs. For hours and hours and hours, I spend looking at university department websites, and it gives me stuff to talk about in interviews. And you'll be surprised how often they say, "Oh, he's actually read our website." So do it because it helps.
Can I pull you two up here for a moment? Because you're both a little ahead of me in terms of the kind of academic progression. And I think you're both absolutely right in that sense of like looking at strategic plan and looking at the website and research clusters and that kind of thing. But when I was coming back into academia from a couple of years out, and like never really having been at the, I mean, certainly not at this point, ever having been at any kind of departmental level, I didn't like know what research clusters were. I didn't understand like what an institute within a department was, or like the politics of what's going on there. And like maybe this is something we should touch on in a later episode, like departmental politics and how to navigate them and that kind of thing.
We need yeah. Wow.
we need a series for that. But I guess like it's maybe just worth kind of touching on, like departments are political in the sense that people work there and they have different priorities, and research clusters are different academics within that department who are getting together and saying X is a topic that we think really needs to be investigated. So for example, in my kind of area of study, local archival research for like in terms of histories of archives. So in certain universities like Hull have these kind of clusters of a couple academics from, say, like the history department and the English department and maybe the archaeology department have kind of gotten together and said, this is a cross-departmental institute where we're going to work together on these cross-disciplinary issues. And when you're looking at stuff like that and looking, I think what I would argue is that the main thing to look at when you're a doctoral student, as opposed to when you're applying later for academic jobs, but when you're a doctoral student, is to look at the research profiles of the academics in that department, because that's going to help you decide what direction research is taking in that department, what do they prioritize like national narrative, historical narratives, for example, or do they prioritize kind of engagement with their locality? Queen Mary University of London does a lot on like the east end of London. They're a lot less concerned with being like a national hub and a lot more concerned with like what is localism and how does the local area around us, how do we engage with that on a research basis? So I think, and this gets us onto how you choose a supervisor, which I think is something we were going to talk about today. But I just thought I'd kind of highlight that it can be really confusing when you're coming into it as a doctoral student and you don't understand how to navigate a department.
Thanks so much for that, Olivia. I think a really much needed perspective, because as you say, sometimes it's easy to forget when it's been a few years since I started looking at PhD programs. But I'd also just like to flag that there is a risk that if you do too much research and you try too hard to tailor your project to a particular department, that you won't end up doing what you want. And please, just to our listeners, to remember that your PhD also needs to excite you. So don't try and cram in
what you want.
Yeah.
Do you
Make sure
remember,
it's
Olivia?
your project.
It's meant to excite you. Do you remember that? Okay, I think we should move on swiftly to our next topic. So just to summarize from Olivia's list, you need a master's degree in a relevant subject, you need a host institution, you need a supervisor, and you need money. Although if you've got 4 things, then you're brilliant. You're good to go. We're going to talk next about how you choose a host institution and a supervisor. And I think Rachel's going to lead our discussion on that, and then we'll go from there. So Rachel, over to you.
Great, thank you. So next big thing is choosing a host institution and a supervisor, as we've already touched on, and it's very central to this whole episode, so we'll come back to it. But there are 3 main strands that we've identified, or ways that you can choose a host institution and supervisor or supervisory team. The first one is responding to an advert for an existing project. So usually when an academic team has secured funding, sometimes they have funding to sponsor 1 or 2 or 3 PhD students. So that's one option. The other one is if you have studied previously at an institution and maybe were supervised by someone during your master's and you want to keep working with them. And then the third option that we have identified is if you just we've put in blind email to an academic, but that is more just reaching out to someone that you may not have met, but maybe you've read their work, you've identified that their research topic is really interesting to you and it's relevant to what you want to do. So you reach out to them even though you haven't met them. So those are the 3 ones that we're going to run through in some detail now. I wonder if we maybe start with replying to an advert for a PhD project. And Olivia, I wonder if we can bring you in to talk about this, because it's not something that Charlie and I have any experience with.
Oh, right. So you two came up with your own project ideas and applied on the basis of an idea you already had. Is that right?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say I wouldn't even give it the title of an idea. It was just like a topic. It was so nebulous back then. But yeah, I had a rough idea. And I think Rachel did that too, right?
Yeah, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, so I came up with my own research proposal.
Okay. Well, Charlie, yours might have been nebulous, but mine was in some respects non-existent. In the sense of like I knew what I thought was important, but I took a couple of years out from academia. I mean, I thought I was just leaving it after my master's, and I went off and I did other things. And I knew that I thought it was important to engage outside academia for a while, and so I was keeping my eye on kind of what was happening in my field, but I wasn't really I didn't have a clear idea of what I would necessarily want to study if I came back. And I applying the project I'm on at the moment came up and was advertising for doctoral students, and so I applying that way for a project that somebody has already kind of conceived of in some way, shape, or form. So this usually means that a professor or a lecturer at a university has secured some kind of funding, which says you're going to have that you can have a couple of PhD students and you can fund them. And that usually means that the lecturer or the principal investigator, as we call them, has submitted an idea to the funding body and said, this is what I want to do. I want, let's say, 6 people to do it with me, and that equals 2 PhD students. And so I want to hire them. And that's like a lot more like a job application process than kind of coming up with, then I guess like what you two did, coming up with your own idea and making an application. You read the kind of job advert, as it were, and then you start thinking around that about what you would want to do within the parameters of that project. So I think it's important to be clear that you're not just going along and saying, what's in this job advert, I will do that. The job advert and the way the project has been conceived of is necessarily going to be a little bit wider than what's actually possible. And you're bringing your own skills, experiences, interests to this advertisement and saying, this is what I would do within the confines of this project that you, the principal investigator, have conceived of. So that was a lot more like a job.
Can I just ask a question? In the
Yeah.
advert, then, is there a kind of list of you must have these skills and a list of like you must have this kind of experience? Because that's what a postdoctoral researcher job, for example, would have in it. For a PhD, is there a list of skills that you have to possess in order to be able to apply?
That's a good question.
Can you remember?
I don't remember if there was a clear set of skills. There was certainly like it said needs a master's degree in a prerequisite subject.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I can't remember, but what it certainly does is it outlines the project grant, or like the wider project that's being done. And then it says, we're searching a PhD student to focus on this aspect of that wider project. And then within even that aspect, you're kind of expected to bring to it your own perspective and your own interests and your own thoughts. In order to so it's kind of creating your own project within the confines of a slightly larger idea, basically. Yeah, and I mean, I was very lucky in that there were only 2 doctoral students advertised for on my project, and I applied for one of those, and I didn't get either of them, but my supervisor said that she liked my idea, that I had kind of come to the interview with, and she helped find additional funding for me to bring me on as an extra doctoral student. So I think, even if you don't get it, don't lose hope. I think.
Do we have a sense of what the kind of ratio is between projects that exist and students who apply and come up with their own kind of project from scratch? Like, in my head, I kind of have this idea that most PhDs in the arts and humanities are kind of applicant led, and that replying to adverts is slightly less common. But I don't know if that's true. Do we have any perspectives on it, just from our own experience?
I would find it very difficult to make a judgment on that. I mean,
no commitment.
Okay, so my experience for the PhD students that I've kind of met over the past 6-7 years is that, as you say, most of them are applicant led. But in terms of some of the big projects that have received funding in the discipline of history over the past kind of 3 to 5 years, what I've noticed is that there's a lot of PhD students built into those funding applications. So perhaps maybe there is a rise in, at least for history, projects that are building in a PhD student or two.
I think I mean, I don't think we have any stats on this or expert knowledge, but
We need to do
my
more
intuition
research,
is also
don't
that
we?
my intuition is also that there are more applicant-led docs, or just that there's more funding available, although as Rachel says, this might be changing, that there's more funding available on the basis of you have your own idea, apply for it, get funding for that individual kind of, what is a PhD, a humanities PhD cost? £100,000 or something over 4 years.
I don't want to think
like
about
that.
it.
Yeah. Rather than being part of a larger, being part of a larger project. But again,
Okay, I'm going to pick on Rachel for the next point, because on our list, how do you choose an institution? We've got that you've studied with someone doing a previous degree and you want to keep working with them on similar topics. That's you, isn't it, Rachel? That was your experience.
It was, yeah. I should say I did also reach out to other academics who I hadn't met, but
You played the field.
she played the field. She
and
pretended to play the field.
Yeah, I think we'll come on to this in a moment about whether you apply to multiple institutions or not when you're doing a PhD. But I had a really wonderful experience during my master's. I really enjoyed the topic that I was working on for my master's, and although my PhD was topic that I proposed was different, it was still kind of in the field, and in my case it was in the field of urban history, and I had really been challenged and pushed by my supervisor for my master's, and I wanted to continue working with him. I thought I had so much to learn, and I could really become a much better scholar under his tutelage. So I was inclined to stay there, and I did in the end. So I think that does definitely influence. It influenced my decision because I didn't end up applying anywhere else, even though I had reached out to other academics. But I think that relationship was important to me, and in terms of I knew what I could get out of it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, we can probably do a podcast on managing your relationship with your supervisor. Although how much we're allowed to actually say it will be tricky because everyone will know who our supervisors are. But it does. I knew people who had bad relationships with their supervisors, and it really can make a difference, positively and negatively. There's no way to tell at the point of application always how it's exactly going to work out. There are all sorts of dimensions to it and so on. But if you know you get on well with someone and you learn well from them, I think that's the positive, isn't it? I feel like when we talk about this, I was just an idiot and didn't know what I was doing when I applied. But probably that makes it helpful for the listeners to reassure them.
Yeah, wait, tell us more.
I mean, for mine, I did study at the institution that I did, and I did my MA and my PhD at the same place. I did my MA there. I'd moved between undergraduate and MA, joined a kind of elite level university with a really strong record in the field I was working with. And my master's, really enjoyed it. Kind of just wanted to stay really and do a PhD at the same place. But when we talk about shopping around later on, I think I've got some things to say for that because I kind of wish I had a little bit, but I'll come back to that in a minute. I just kind of wanted to get in. I was desperate to like get into a PhD program more than anything else. And then I was going to worry about all the other stages after that. But for me, it was just about like, will they have me kind of thing. I
was gonna ask, do you think there was an element for you of like worrying that nowhere else would take you, or like thinking I'm in here, so I'm not.
Yeah.
Like I shouldn't even, not even worth trying anywhere else because they.
I don't think anyone explained it to me well enough that it's a good idea to shop around and it's a good idea. I think maybe I might have had a bit more advice from potential supervisors and so on about how the process works. Part of why we're doing this series of podcasts for me is to pass on advice that I wish I had at that level. And this is a good example of it, I think. But not that I regret how anything turned out at all, and I did very well in my PhD and I enjoyed it. But I do wish somehow that I'd had a bit more information before I'd made the decision. I think I made the right decision in the end, but I don't know if it was an informed one at the time. Maybe, there's a bit of luck involved there, I think. So
Yeah.
there's me.
I think it's worth highlighting. I think it's worth highlighting that equally, like if you're applying for an advertised position or an advertised PhD, you're also not really shopping around unless you apply for multiple ones and then get all of them and choose the one you want most. I mean, I'm glad I applied for the one I did, and I'm very thrilled that I got it. But there's no you it's always like kind of like a job application in the sense that you're so desperate to get it that then when they say, okay, you've got it, you don't go, okay, now that I've got it, is this actually the right thing for me? I think it's just you kind of go, okay, this is a thing that I'm doing now. And so there's different, there's an extent to which it's worth shopping around in some cases, and sometimes it's not that it's not an option, it's just not really a feature of the process. But it's good to know that there are like a couple different ways of going about it, so you can kind of mix and match them if you want to.
And I'll take us to the next one if that's okay, because I've got experience of this, which is writing an email to an academic that you don't know. And the email might start something like, "Dear person, I'm interested in pursuing a PhD in the broad area of this study, and I've got a research idea I'd like to develop. Given your expertise in this, this, and this, I was wondering if we could meet to discuss the suitability of doing this project under your supervision." Something like that, a kind of hyper polite email that says, "You've never met me," or "You met me once at a conference and nobody will remember me, but this is my idea. Would you discuss this with me?" So this happens quite common. It's obviously more common for student-led projects, right? Because you're not responding to an advert. You're writing to an academic whose work you've read, or who you may have met, or who's may have been recommended to you by one of your tutors previously. And you're saying, "This is my idea, you work on this, do you think we could work together?" essentially. Rachel, did you do this?
I did, yeah, and kind of used a very similar template really to reach out to academics whose work I'd read, and every response I got was really kind. And I say, no, it feels really scary when you first send it off because you're so worried about what other people think of you, and you just feel like such a little fish in a big pond. But academics are usually pretty warm and welcoming in their responses to these ideas. And if a potential, I would say some of the responses that I got from potential supervisors were like, "This project sounds really interesting, but I'm not sure that I'm the best person to supervise you. Perhaps you should contact this person or this other person." So even if they're not available or they don't feel that they are the right person, they might direct you on to someone else, which is really helpful and kind. Other responses I got were like, "Yes, let's come and meet." And actually that is the next step that we've noted down, is that I went and I met with a potential supervisor. We talked about the idea I had and actually really shaped it in that meeting that we had. This was well before COVID time, so it was in person, although of course you could do it online now. And that was really the basis for an application that I started to put together for that institution, which I didn't end up applying to. But yeah, please don't be afraid, even though it feels really scary.
Was it scary? Was it scary meeting those people?
Yeah, I was so nervous. I had like butterflies in my tummy. But as I hope we all know now, because we're either in the process or have done a PhD, but the academic world, especially, well, speaking for the humanities, is really nice. And you know that when you meet someone, you can have a lovely chat with them about a topic that they're interested in and you're interested in. So you always have that shared ground. Even if you've never met them before, you can still carry a conversation with them for that time.
And if you can't, then you've dodged a bullet.
Yeah, good point,
you know in advance.
I've got experience of this from the other side of being the person that people have written to me and asked me, would I supervise their PhDs? So I've come at this like from both sides. It's really cool when someone sends you an email and says, "I really liked whatever you've written or your work on whatever. And I think it'd be great if you be my supervisor. It's the coolest thing because it's like, I don't know, like, and really flattering, right? That someone values your work and that values a relationship that you might have. Unfortunately, I've only ever been in temporary fixed term contracts, so I've never been able to say yes to any of these people. Probably started to happen maybe like 3 or 4 years ago in one of my previous jobs. I reckon I've maybe had, I don't know, 10 emails or so over my career from people saying, can I come and work with you? And in every case, exactly as Rachel just said, I've said, I'd love this, I can't, but have you considered this person or have you considered that person? And I've always tried to kind of recommend someone else at the same institution that I'm working at, so that A, my institution can still offer something to that person. So it's a bit selfish. But also B, if that person does end up coming, I can at least have some kind of relationship with them, even if I can't be their supervisor, right? Because if I'm on a fixed term contract, it's against the policy of the institution for me to supervise them. Because someone joins to do a PhD and they're going to be there 3 or 4 years in the humanities, and then I leave for another job, then that's not fair on that applicant, right? So it's, you know, looking after them. But I've always wanted to kind of have some kind of relation, and with, I don't know, 3 or 4 of these people who've ever written to me, I still chat to them, give them advice at conferences if I see them and that kind of thing, because I want to help them, right? I desperately would love to be a PhD supervisor, but at the moment I can't be one. So, you know, if you're listening and you want to be supervised by me, I can't.
Can I ask, because you said it's really flattering and it's like a great compliment to be told that somebody's read your work and is interested in it and wants to work with you. Do you also experience a sense of excitement about their projects and the potential? Like sometimes do you get do you get queries where you're like, oh, it's not actually that interesting to me, or it doesn't seem like that well fleshed out an idea, or are you universally kind of excited, or is there, you know,
I think I think a bit of both. Yeah. So if someone's got the thread of idea that isn't that exciting, because you can judge this if you want, but I like to think I'm a nice person, so I would want to help them improve that idea, even if it's not something that I'm hyper keen on. But it's their idea, right? So it's not my life and my academic career. So if I could supervise that person, theoretically, you know, if I was in a position to do so, I would want to try and help them develop their idea because it's their PhD, it's not mine. It doesn't have to be totally nailed on the same topic as me. Otherwise, it'd be boring, and I'd be trying to get them to say the same thing as me. It's probably better if their topic is slightly different from mine, and therefore they can develop it under their own steam. One person who applied, who wrote to me, who now is doing their PhD, had the most amazing idea. I said to them, I wish I'd thought of this. Like, I wanted to steal it and do a whole book on it because it was such a cool topic that I'd never thought of before. And I'll bore you with a bit of detail. Essentially, I work on medieval perceptions of the past in the medieval period. So how does a medieval person think about what came before them and why do they care, right? And someone had an idea, I want to do a PhD on medieval perceptions of the future in medieval chronicle writing. And like, what do they think is going to happen after them and why do they care? And it blew my mind. It was amazing. This person's now doing a PhD and I'm really happy for them. I was gutted, but I couldn't do it. So can you tell how excited I am? Like, I am genuinely excited when people write to me. So there you go.
I guess part of what I'm getting from that is that, like, anybody like you, and I think a lot of people are, at least in the humanities, are, you know, have similar attitudes. Not everybody, like, there are people out there who will be unkind. You just have to be prepared for them and, you know, say, okay, well, they're not the person for me. But like, people who care about their subject the way you care about your subject and want to encourage other people are, like, if you write to them with a query, I think they're not gonna even think to themselves like, what an idiot, can't be bothered, and then, you know, and then write back and be like, no, I'm so sorry, I'm not available anyway, you might consult this other person. Like, they're just not going to do that. They want broadly people in the humanities want more humanities research. So
Yeah.
they're, you know, they're gonna
Yeah.
they're like, even if they can't help you, they don't think you're an idiot, you know. But that said, I suspect it's probably a good idea to make sure that when you are writing to people asking for, like, saying that you're interested in their topic and you want to work with them, having like a reasonably well fleshed out description of your idea. And you don't have to have
Yeah.
everything
Right. Yeah.
in place, every detail, but you have to have like a kind of, you know, like a research question is helpful, for
So,
example.
Rachel, did anyone ask you when you wrote these emails to these people? Did they then say, "Yeah, send me a proposal," or something really scary like that, like "Send me 500 words about what you want to do"? Did you have to do that?
That's a great question. I can't honestly remember. I know one of them I sent a proposal to after we'd met to have a conversation. So it definitely came into the process, but it might have been, I think it was after we met.
Yeah.
And then the institution that I ended up with, that my potential supervisor there looked through multiple drafts and gave feedback on my proposal and my idea. And I wonder if maybe this is a nice segue into talking about whether you have a good idea for a PhD topic, because it seems like we're sitting around the issue, and this is one of the things that made, like, helped shape my project, but also helped indicate to me that I had a good project, was these conversations with potential supervisors, right? So that conversation you talked about, Charlie, with that potential PhD student, if potential supervisors, if they want to work with you, they will be honest and also hopefully kind, but they will kind of give indications about the feasibility of it, whether they think it's important, and give feedback on your ideas. So you're not necessarily totally alone, but as Olivia said, you have to have a good fleshed out idea of a project before you go to them, because it's your responsibility to come up with an idea, not theirs.
Yeah. And also, I think, like, if you say, "Oh, I'm interested in this broad field," and then the supervisor says, "Oh yeah, how about you do this?" Then from that moment onwards, it can be a kind of feeling like you're pleasing them rather than yourself, right? Like, of course, they're going to suggest, "Oh, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this." But what I feel like, even in Lydia's case, where you're applying for basically a job, right, on a project that exists already, you've still got to lead the intellectual angle of the project, right? You've got to drive the questions and maybe the source material that you're going to work with, or the text that you're going to be interpreting, and that kind of thing. You don't want to feel like you're trying to please your supervisor all the time. All of us have at some point, right? But I don't know. That would just be my.
Can
I
I
agree. Oh yeah, Rachel.
Oh, sorry. I was going to actually do a bit of a counterpoint, although this is based on my experience once I was already in the PhD. So very quickly, I applied with a topic. About not even 6 months into the PhD, I was like, "Oh no, this isn't quite working. It's not as feasible as I thought it was." Very normal, but we can talk about that in later episodes. But my supervisor said, "Oh, well, there's this great source material or an archive that I don't think anyone's really looked at. Why don't you go and have a look and see what's there?" And I would have never come across that body of materials if he hadn't suggested it. And I didn't feel any obligation to then pursue a particular agenda once I got there. But he was really instrumental in shaping my project as a result. So I don't think it's always as Charlie outlines.
But that's good. That's good supervising. I think it's a battle. I think if you apply to be on somebody else's project, to make it feel like your own, or like it can be. Yeah, I put a lot of mental effort into like making my project my own and saying this is something I am doing in X, Y, and Z ways. Not something I'm doing in order to please my supervisor. So I think I agree. It's important to make sure that your project is your own, and good supervising is is a big it has to be a part of that. But yeah, I think I agree with Charlie, especially you want to make sure that it's like, it sounds like you were pointed in the right direction, but then you went and looked at it and went, I want to do this. Yeah, which is great.
So while we wrap up the section on how do you choose institution or supervisor, just a last point to make is that if you think you're ready to apply to a place and you're happy to make that application with that supervisor, just kind of what does the process look like? In most cases, if someone's happy to support your project, you'll have to complete a formal application to that institution, which will look a little bit like the formal application that you've made to an undergraduate or a master's degree or something, probably some kind of online form. There'll be an element where you have to complete a research proposal, which will be 500 to 1,000 words or something similar to that. And then the funding application will probably come after the application for a place. So you want to think of it as like a two-stage project. First stage, get accepted by the institution. Second stage, try and secure funding for that project. In Olivia's case, if you're applying for a job that already exists, then in theory that funding will already exist. So that won't be quite so necessary, although in the end we did have to do some of that. In a kind of self-directed application, student-led application, those two processes, institutional acceptance, funding acceptance, they're the two parts that you're going to have to get. So quite often you might find that you've been accepted to a department, but you won't know whether you've got the funding for it yet. And then you have to kind of make a decision about that, which brings us really nicely on to the next thread of discussion, which is about funding. And I think I, in particular, wanted to spend some time on this because finding finance to support a PhD can, in many cases, make a decision for you about whether you're actually going to do that PhD or not, because many people can't afford to just forego the income they may have had for 3 to 4 years in arts and humanities just because they are interested in books or whatever they're interested in, right? So, like,
that's it. We're all just interested in books.
I am.
Just a bunch of people interested in books.
Funding is really important, and if you guys are okay, I'll just carry on talking because I think like this is important to me as well, because I've seen this in other people. In the humanities, you can fund your own way through a PhD. It's called self-funding. You can do this through getting loans. There are loans available through it. Some people have family wealth that they can draw on. I guess we're all laughing in the background because like not that many people do. Or you can try and do it through part-time work, but that's getting really, really hard these days because like the margins that we have to live on are getting smaller and smaller. So self-funding, pros and cons. Let's quickly run through them. Pros, depending on the type of part-time work you do, it can help you learn new skills beyond the ones you're learning in your PhD. So Rachel, you learned some things through this, right? From a part-time job. Not to delve too deep into your funding situation, but it's fair to say you did have a part-time job doing your PhD. So yeah, tell us about that. How was that experience?
Well, that's right. Yeah. So I'm very happy to be very transparent. I was partially funded through the college that I was attached to at the university, but that was a very small funding allowance that was given to me each year. So I self-funded the rest, and I worked as a librarian. So that gave me a huge skill set in terms of learning some library sciences on the job. And I also worked as an impact assistant, which for people who are just applying to a PhD, that will be a kind of foreign word, but it's more or less working with universities on public engagement. And we'll leave that as it is rather than open that kind of fish.
We can avoid that at all costs.
Yeah. But both of these part-time jobs gave me skill sets that influenced the job that I got after my PhD, because I moved outside of the academy and essentially worked in library sciences for a year. And the only reason I was able to do that was because of the skills and experience that I gained through my part-time work as a librarian during my PhD. So that was really helpful to me as a career trajectory.
Can I ask how long you spent, like what was your kind of balance of work, PhD versus part-time, like, enough to like keep you going, as it were? Did you do your PhD part-time at the same, like, or?
Thanks, Olivia. That's such a good question, and one I should definitely talk about. I did my PhD full time. I worked, in hindsight, it was insane. At one point, I had 3 part-time jobs while I was also doing my PhD full time. So I had 6 hours a week, working at the library, and then I had teaching, and then I also did impact work, which was very ad hoc, just based on how much funding the department had to do this public engagement work. And then I also worked at a bar for a while, or in a pub, sorry. So I wouldn't recommend that, but when I was working kind of, say, on balance, like between 10 and 15 hours a week on part-time and doing my PhD full-time, that was manageable for me, but it's really dependent on kind of your own situation.
Yeah, that's correct. I think on if you're here on a visa, I think in the UK specifically, you can't work more than 20 hours a week if you're doing your PhD full time. And maybe we should mention that it is possible to switch from full time to part time if you end up needing
Yeah.
to take time to work during your PhD. That's, most universities will accommodate that. If they don't, there has to be a very, very specific reason why not, and they should be helping you out if they're not going to accommodate it. But like, my impression is that most will, and it's just a question of change of registration. Basically, it's a formality.
My
But
PhD
that's
experience
nuts.
was similar to Rachel. Sorry, jumping in.
No, no.
I funded from part-time work, and I had a tricky job. Bit like Rachel. We've got on our notes like some of the cons of this, that part-time work can give you additional stress. It can restrict your ability to travel. It's rarely possible to make enough money, so you can't fund an entire PhD, pay your tuition fees, and live and pay your rent and whatever just through part-time work. That's called full-time work, right? So tricky. I kind of tried to make it work, with a similar range of stupid part-time jobs. And I said last time we were on that I had moments where I really didn't think I was going to get through the PhD. And a lot of those moments were relating to the stress of part-time work. I was working in pubs as well, finishing late at night and thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Why am I serving grumpy, drunk people when I'm supposed to be trying to be an academic here? I would say now it was worth it, but at the time, yeah, wasn't sure. Tricky. So beware of part-time work as a way to fund a PhD. I would say it can supplement your income, but it can't really be the main income you're going to have. Otherwise, you may need to start thinking about a part-time PhD and more hours work. And I know people who've done it. I know plenty of people who've done it. A very, very senior academic in my institution worked in a popular coffee chain for the whole of her PhD. And now she is an incredibly well-respected and universally loved academic in our department. And so, it isn't a barrier.
One thing possibly also worth mentioning, the kind of maybe a slightly more positive side, is that my experience has been that, especially if there aren't an enormous number of doctoral students at your institution, if you're maybe one of the smaller departments at your university or something like that, people kind of look out for their own, which can often sound like nepotism, but it also means that if part-time administrative jobs come up at the university, or if somebody's funded project has a 1 day a week reasonably paid administrative position, just kind of dealing with the like processing expenses or something, then they'll often offer it internally within the department to make sure that their doctoral students, or if like there's like a little teaching gig that comes up for 2 weeks over the summer or something, they'll often offer it internally to their doctoral students. So, and especially, I guess what I'd say is like, don't pretend that you're doing well financially if you're not. Like, make sure it's known if you're struggling, because people want to help you out.
And on that, I would say there's absolutely no shame in being self-funded. And I just want to make that really clear from the outset, because sometimes there's a little bit of a stigma around it. But yeah, it's fine. That's it. That's the end of the conversation. It is fine to self-fund if you want to.
No one ever, in any of my academic job applications for lecturing roles, postdoctoral positions or anything, no one has ever asked me in an interview, did you self-fund your PhD? No one's ever asked me that. What counts?
Nobody's ever asked me during my PhD.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. What counts is that you've done it. And
all it counts is that it's on the CV, I've got my PhD. That's all people care about.
I think it's actually quite rude to ask people how they're funding their doctorate. Like we're happy to talk about it here because that's what we're here for, but nobody goes around.
So you've also said, Olivia, that some people can do their PhDs later in life, and that helps funding as well, right?
Yeah, that's kind of a family wealth thing, but I just thought it was worth mentioning that that it is possible to do doctoral degrees later in life, and it's not a huge proportion of people, but some people choose to do their doctorate degree when they have had something of a career behind them and they've built up a certain amount of wealth, which means that it's financially possible for them to do that, or they have, for example, a partner who's able to support them for a couple of years, or maybe in the case of generational wealth, when their parents have passed away and maybe left them something. So it's I just thought it was worth mentioning that, like, we talk about this as though everybody's in their 20s, kind of working in pubs and stuff, but there are other ways to do it, and just thought that was worth mentioning.
One of the best MA dissertations I've ever marked was from somebody exactly like that in my job last year, and she's now doing a PhD and absolutely loving life because she's had her career, she's finished early, did an MA, and went, you know what, I love this, I need to do more of it, and that's what she's doing. And it doesn't count against her that she's physically older than anybody else. If anything, actually it makes her slightly better because she's more driven and focused with knowing exactly what she wants to be doing, and she's got her skill set and so on. So
and there are still even job opportunities in it if you're not past a certain age, I guess. We have some people, we have some mature students who did doctoral students at my institution and then have gone on to get jobs there. So it's definitely possible.
So another source of funding, apart from the kind of self-funded route, is that you could secure a funding grant, which can be awarded either by an individual university that has a set number of funding grants to give out every year, or an external funding body. So the Arts and Humanities Research Council used to be the big funder in my field, and they have a set number of doctoral grants to give out every year across all the different universities in the country, and you apply to them through the university. So host institutions can guide you towards funding opportunities, but you should also kind of have a look for other opportunities yourself. I mean, where is it? That's a really good question. Like, where would you go to look for funding opportunities? I guess the potential supervisor would be the best place to start. But like, do we have any suggestions of like, how can people find funding? It's like the ultimate question, isn't it? Where is this magic money?
Yeah.
I guess like for me, social media is a big thing for funding and research opportunities. I'm quite active on the social media platform that's now owned by a certain strange person from the States. And actually, it's really, much as I hate that platform, it's still really useful to me because I'm in touch with funding institutions on there with other individuals, and I can ask questions and other academics will chip in and answer back. So I think, that's a place.
Being networked in whatever way, shape, or form is not a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Being networked into funding bodies.
Yeah.
And I would say on university websites and department websites, they will, in the prospective PhD tab or whatever, however it's labeled on each institution, they will list the funding opportunities that are available if you're applying to them, whether it is university funding or AHRC or whichever funding body they work with. So I would say that's a starting point, because if you are bringing your own project forward, that's usually the place to start.
It might be worth kind of touching a little bit on the structure of funding, which I think all three of us understand best in the UK. So it's I'm not sure we can necessarily speak to American and other Anglophone audiences here, but in the UK, the vast majority of humanities funding comes from something called the Arts and Humanities Research Council, or the AHRC, which is the government-funded body, which allocates a certain amount of money to usually clusters of universities across the UK. So there's a cluster of universities in London called London Arts and Humanities Partnership, or LAHP, or LAP, and that's one AHRC funded cluster. There's another one in Kent and Sussex. There's one called Midlands for Cities, I think, is another one.
Midlands for Cities, yeah, I think
that Midlands for Cities, which deals with universities in the Midlands. It doesn't have anything to do with urban policy. It's just it's called Midlands for Cities. So there's a whole bunch of them. I wish Charlie, maybe we should put a list of them in the blog post or something.
That's a good idea.
But so AHRC funnels money to these clusters of universities for a certain number of doctoral projects, and then the universities allocate them accordingly to the number to different departments and different subject areas and that kind of thing. I think that's a very rough sketch of generally how it works. And so if you want to go through one of those, you apply to a university, and then if the university accepts you, you apply to the localized cluster funding body, to LAP or Midlands for Cities, which pertains to that university, and you apply directly to that funding body, but you say, I've been accepted to one of your universities. So that's like the vast majority, I think, of humanities funded research in the UK. There are also other funding bodies. So for things like my project, which was already funded, my project is funded by the European Horizon program. So that's a funding body that gave money to my principal investigator, who's also my supervisor, and said, here's money based at your single university, hire people. So that's one way of doing it. And AHRC also funds those kinds of research projects, which then bring on, as do other funding bodies like the British Academy and the Leverhulme Foundation and that kind of thing. So there are private enterprises as well, and then again the European state funds that fund doctorates. And then there are very occasionally, I think, is that right? Usually kind of one or two doctoral, like amounts of money for a doctorate degree, sometimes based at a department at a university, where that department has been given a certain amount of money to bring on a doctoral student, and then you're applying to them for that money. Yeah. Can you guys think of any other ways that money comes into the humanities?
So you can also have like kind of external organizations that can kind of like supplement and help. So for example, where I work, there's a castle museum, right, and a university in the same town, and there can be like a collaboration between the castle museum and the university, and you're supervised by someone who works in the castle museum and someone else who works at the university, and your project is like curating as well as academic, right? So there's kind of two angles on it. You're getting practical experience. It's a slightly more vocational route that way, to try and kind of work with a private enterprise. A castle museum is probably publicly funded or whatever,
but like an a heritage institution or something. Yeah.
And that can happen with carry on.
Sorry, is that usually funded by the institute, like the external institution and the university together? They'll kind of
I'm not entirely sure, but I would guess probably there's some buy-in there. Otherwise, it's got to, they're giving skills and stuff, but they're also giving probably a financial commitment. I guess like we could reel off all kinds of examples that we've heard of, like collaborations with places like the British Library and the Wellcome Trust and all those kind of places that might be interested in a buy-in. But ultimately, I guess the advice would be kind of speak to the potential supervisor about that kind of thing. Look for job opportunities in the UK. Definitely, I'll put this on the blog. But the main place to go for academic job opportunities is a website called jobs.ac.uk, where universities and partner institutions will advertise academic roles down to MA and PhD roles as well, not just academics and professors and so. So yeah, funding, scary, but important. Hopefully we're giving you some information here that's going to help you be more informed about making a decision and leading on and helping you make the most out of your decisions. Probably we want to think about wrapping up fairly soon because we've been talking for quite a long time, and hopefully our listeners are still interested in everything we've got to say. But I guess like a good place to finish would be thinking about how do you know you've got a really good idea for your topic? And how do you know if you're going to try and make one of these applications, whether you're on the right lines and whether you've got things to talk about? So Rachel, you talked earlier about that kind of dynamic with potential supervisors, and you kind of get a feel, don't you, about whether it's a good idea or not based on the feedback that they give you. Anything else you want to say about that? You can continue with the other topics if you want.
Thanks, Charlie. I mean, I think I've said I'm kind of happy to move on to some of the questions that you can ask yourself about your project, because I think that's kind of really helpful, concrete guidance to our listeners, is that there can be a series of questions you can run through when you've got a rough idea of what you want to do your PhD on. And I've put together a list of questions, but hopefully Olivia and Charlie can jump in, and maybe they have different questions to ask, but these are generally the questions I ask myself before I start any research project, but especially a PhD. So the first one is about how does it further our current knowledge of the topic? You need to be really clear on whether you're making an intervention in the field, whether you're adding to the knowledge that we have. What is your project doing to our current understanding of this topic? I don't know if maybe actually Charlie and Olivia want to jump in with any comments on that question before we move through to different questions.
I mean, for me, if I was assessing a student on this, I'd want them to be able to talk about what's been written in that field previously, and then how that's influenced the decision that they've taken on what topic they want to do. So it's kind of like, give me a miniature literature review. What's been written previously? What do you want to write next?
Yeah, because you can't answer that question of how does it further our current knowledge unless you have a very clear understanding of the particular field. You don't have to know everything, though. Really clear. That's we're not asking the impossible. You can't do all of that research before you've even started your PhD, but you should have kind of some idea. Olivia, do you have thoughts?
Only that I had very little knowledge of the current state of research in my field before I started, but that was helpful in the sense that that's partly because I was applying to a project idea somebody else had come up with. So I read a little bit around it, but I was not. Just to be clear, when I was applying to somebody else's proposal suggestion, as it were, I was not wholly clear on that. But if you're coming up with your own, you definitely need to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, and I think alongside that, it doesn't have to just be about the content in terms of thinking about how that's pushing our field of study, but also about the methodology. Like, are there particular elements that are innovative in the methodology that you want to take to actually complete your project? Are you bringing in digital humanities? Are you working with a sector of the public that will really add a fresh dimension to the topic that you're exploring? Weaving that into your project and having a clear understanding of kind of a selling point of your research project is really important. Charlie, you're nodding very enthusiastically.
I'm used to job interviews where they say, I've had it a few times in interviews for actual lecturing jobs. Question: how is your research innovative? And then you go, oh, it's not. But then you have to think of reasons why it is. So yeah, I'm recognizing that. Exactly what you said there, Rachel. Go on. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, that can be as I say simple, but like as simple as like you're bringing in methods from maybe like other disciplines that aren't normally used in your discipline or something. And it doesn't, it doesn't have to be I'm a humanities researcher who is good at coding, although that's increasingly on the up. But just like what do you do? How is what you are doing different from what has come before?
Yeah, and I've actually said in a job interview before, sometimes my methodologies are tried and tested and they've stood around for about 200 years, but no one's ever written a book about this topic, and I wrote the book about the topic. So it must be innovative.
Right, that's knowledge innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Another question that I'd flagged is there something you can talk about with timing, or is timing an important element of your PhD proposal? So for example, I was thinking about some potential projects, and one is surrounding migration. And so this is a topic that's really relevant in our current discourse. So is there a reason maybe why your project should be done right now? Why should you do it at this moment? Is there a connection that you can make to current society? And this is not going to be applicable for every project, and it doesn't have to be by any means, but it's just one of those ones to think about, that if there is that connection, bring it in.
It can also have to do with like what is the timing within your field. It's more popular these days to talk about something outside, like something within society, as you said, but it can just be that there is a certain direction that knowledge is taking within your field and you're tapping into that, and it makes sense to do this project now. It wouldn't have made sense for me to do my project 50 years ago because the existing research that supports it wasn't there. The trends in academic thought weren't there. So and equally, like it wouldn't make sense to, I don't know, what's something that's a little out of fashion these days? Write a biography of an old white man. You can still get away.
It'll come back.
I think people are still doing that. You can still get away with that.
Give it 20 years.
Yeah, it'll come back around.
20 years and it'll be cool again.
But like you'd have to write a lot more about why that's important maybe these days than you would have had to 50 years ago, for example.
Really important,
Yeah. I would say, sorry, so just to move on quickly to the fourth question that I think is really important, which is whether you can answer the research question that you're setting out for yourself. So in your PhD proposal, you need to outline broadly what your research questions are, and are they questions that can be answered in the next 3 to 4 years? Because you have to remember that for each of these questions you're asking of your research project, it all ties into convincing the university, but the funding body, that you can achieve this in the next 3 to 4 years. And so that's an important question to ask yourself. Can you go and see the materials that you want to see? Can you work with the stakeholders that you want to work with? And can you complete all of this analysis and writing in the next 3 to 4 years? If you can't with your current project, that's fine. Just whittle down kind of those questions, figure out how to make the project feasible. But don't forget that you need to convince people.
I mean, some of the best master's level studies that I've looked at have been, I've got this massive topic, I've got these massive questions, but all I've got space to do in 15,000 words is look at one tiny case study. I'm going to really focus in on that and then reach some broader conclusions at the end. A PhD is kind of that times 3 or 4, right? So like, limit yourself. The best piece of advice I would give to any student is coming up with their research question is go narrow rather than broad, because you can say more things about a narrow body of material than you can say about a huge body of material. You want kind of short and fat rather than long and thin, right? You want like to say loads of stuff about a tiny body of stuff than not really saying anything about lots of things. That makes sense? Maybe I've been talking too long and I'm speaking gibberish.
What you don't want is what I've ended up in, which is long and fat. and then a year out from submitting, you have to all right,
Oh,
where is
no.
the short and fat in the
No.
big and fat?
Oh no.
Oh
Oh
dear.
dear. Cool. Have you finished, Rachel? Is that it? Cool.
Yeah, unless other people have questions they want to suggest.
Well, I think it's worth wrapping up quite quickly, but with like, I don't know. Last week we talked about should I do a PhD in the last episode, and if you haven't listened to that, please go back because I really enjoyed recording it. I think it's a really informative piece. Look at the blog as well and click the links through. We'll give you all the information. This week is kind of, okay, how does it actually work, and kind of navigating the process of how you're going to go about doing it. I don't know. What do we think, like, overall? Would you give advice to anybody? If you could give one piece of advice, what would it be? It's just a really horrible question, but like, if you could give one advice to someone who's applying to do PhDs and trying to navigate that system, what do you think you'd say to them? Silence, nothing.
Don't be afraid to talk to people. Talk to people, talk to people, talk to people, talk people's heads off. And maybe not potential supervisors, but don't be afraid to talk to potential supervisors.
Okay. What about you, Rachel?
I was nodding enthusiastically because that was more or less where my mind went as well, Olivia, is talk to people about your ideas, but actually, again, really, I would put emphasis on talking to your potential supervisor. And just not being afraid to have those conversations, because they'll really inform your proposal and hopefully make it stronger.
I'd also say talk to current PhD students or people who've recently finished them, because when I was doing my MA, probably the best guidance I had was from a couple of current PhD students who helped me through and kind of, oh, you don't want to do that. Oh, yeah, do that. My big advice would be shop around. I probably you picked up on that over the course of this discussion, but look at other places. Even if you're wildly in love with the relationship you've got with your supervisor, probably the wrong word there, and you're happy and you're really thrilled that this is going to develop you as an academic, it's still worth looking at what else is out there, because you can only then make that correct decision based on looking at others and comparing them and so on. So yeah,
you should also maybe just very quickly clarify that like you can apply to more than one funding body, and like you almost certainly should apply to more than one university and more than one funding body, because it's not up to your supervisor whether or not you get the funding. So even if you have the best relationship with your supervisor, with somebody at one university, and you want to study with them, you may not get the funding there. You may get the funding with somebody else at a different university.
Yeah.
And
totally.
Shop around and apply more than once.
Cool. Well, hopefully you enjoyed listening to our podcast. If you did, please give us a review, give us your feedback, tell us about other topics you might want to us to discuss in future weeks. We're aiming to cover kind of the whole plethora of academic experiences here. So not just applying to PhDs and sort of starting the journey, but we'll also be talking about in future weeks about kind of other things, maybe like job applications, how to develop publications and all these types of things. So there are plenty of other topics that we're going to be talking about on the Early Career Researcher podcast. Do follow us on our socials. As I said, do give us reviews. All the information will be available on the on where you get your podcasts from. Probably, I reckon next time we're going to be talking about the actual kind of process of like being a researcher, and maybe kind of for people who are new to doing PhDs maybe, or doing research, how do we negotiate the kind of challenges that they pose and so on. But if there's something you want us to talk about, then please let us know. So thanks for listening again. Goodbye from Rachel and Olivia.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. Look forward to speaking to you soon.